in the discussion about slavery, there's sort of now this sort of politically correct conversation that we identify folks as enslaved people as opposed to slaves. And I noticed, Mary Beth, that you were very conscious of doing that in your presentation. The other thing is how many of you all got to see the film Lincoln? One of the things that I thought was very exciting about that film was exactly what you said. The African Americans who filled up the balconies as the discussion went forward. It showed that we were actively interested and involved in the conversation, and you pointed that out as well. You've also brought us to a point where, we've talked about how African Americans were disenfranchised, but they were fighting that disenfranchisement. In Washington, D.C., where we lived, we were also involved in a national movement, which became known as the Civil Rights Movement. And Dr. Frank Smith, you're going to pick up there and just talk about what happened nationally, but also, how the role of African Americans in the District of Columbia. So it's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me say good morning to everybody and tell you I'm very happy to be back here at the Historical Society. Bernard and I both were on the board of directors at one time, did our best to try to save this organization because it is worthwhile and it plays a very important role. Of course, the PNC Bank, which hosted this event at our museum last year, and everybody got a chance to see the museum, and if you didn't get to see it, it's not too late. A Baptist preacher once said, everybody don't get religion on Sunday, some people get it on Monday. It's not so important when you get it, as long as you get it before it's too late. I also want to just say that as we, on January 1, America celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. We call it the sesquicentennial. It's hard to say, but it means 150 years. And then in August of this year, we are going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Now, I've got an 8-year-old granddaughter who thinks I participated in both of those events. I'm still, we're still trying to straighten out our history among our young. They still, and some of our old people too don't know the difference between the two time periods. But it is 150th anniversary of the and the Emancipation Proclamation is important because the Emancipation Proclamation is the first document in the history of America that promises freedom to 3.9 million African Americans who are being held as slaves, bought and sold, traded, lost in poker games, willed to people in death, and offered to people as marriage gifts and things like that. And so for the first time in the history of the country, America, and President Lincoln actually issues a proclamation that says that on January 1, 1863, if the South does not surrender, come back into the Union, put down their arms, he's going to emancipate slavery in those states that are in rebellion. And now, of course, the opposite of that is, if you surrender and come back into the Union, things will be, quote, as they were. And those are Lincoln's words. And as they were means you can keep your slaves. So black people not only see a document for the first time which promises us freedom, but we go through 100 days of frustration and speculation and hope and prayer and all this while we waited on January 1 to come about because this thing was issued in September to take effect January 1st. But for the first time we hear that it's promised freedom. Now, and paragraph 6 of that Emancipation Proclamation says that persons of suitable condition will be enlisted in the Union Army. That's what the document said. So they say, the President says to the South, not only are we going to, quote, emancipate the slaves, but we are also going to enlist persons of suitable condition into the Union Army. What does that mean? We're going to arm the slaves. Now, in some of these states, Georgia, my home state, Mississippi, and others, the slaves outnumber the white people. So, now why didn't they accept this offer that the President made? The President, that's why Lincoln is so controversial. You all probably know this already in the black community and the white community too, but in the black community particularly. Because he was doing this as what he called a fit and necessary military measure. And he said necessary for him to win the war. And why is it fit and necessary? Because these slaves had put themselves in such a pivotal position that the Confederate Army could not win without them, and the Union Army couldn't win without them. That's an amazing story right there. They had put themselves in such a pivotal position. And we have an example of one of these slaves at our museum, a guy named Robert Smalls. When the Civil War starts, he's a slave being used by his master to guide a Confederate ship, a gunboat. That used to be a boat that they hauled tobacco and cotton and fertilizer on before the war started. When the war started, they converted this to a battleship, and they kept Robert Smalls as the captain. Why did they keep him? Because they wanted the best. It's like when you get on an airplane. You want the best pilot you can get to fly this baby. They want the best pilot they can get to operate this. Who was the best pilot? Robert Smalls. So the Confederates need him to run their slave ship, and the Union needs him. And if they don't find a way to get him into the Union Army, the Union can't win. So one day Robert Smalls says to himself, I'm going to figure out how to use this ship to get my freedom. They go into Charleston Harbor one weekend while these white sailors, Confederate slave-loving sailors, go into the city to get drunk for the weekend. They leave these slaves on board to make this ship seaworthy again. They patch it up and get it ready, load it up, resupply it with weapons. Robert Smalls puts some sheets on there so they can sell this baby out. I told you he was the pilot. Sells it out, turns it over to the Union Army. Robert Smalls shows up at the Union Army with his own weapon, fully loaded. The Confederates need him to help the Confederacy. The Union need him. So he ends up with the Union Army, and they've got people like Frederick Douglass out there telling them, do not help any of these people. Don't help the North, don't help the South until they agree to free the slaves. On the first day Douglass hears about this, he says, I don't care who wins this war. If we're going to be slaves when it's finished, we're only going to help the people who decide. So that's really a way to sort of backdrop all of this. The slaves have made themselves what one Ms. Berry, I think last weekend said, were fit and necessary. They were fit because they were trained for these jobs, and they were necessary for both sides. And so President Lincoln, as a measure to correct what he called a fit and necessary Union military measure, he put that paragraph into paragraph 6 of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, there was something else going on too. At this point in his life, President Abraham Lincoln went back and forth to Soldiers' Home for R&R himself. In the summer particularly, it was hot and muggy down here in this part of Washington. He would go up on the hill, and on his way back and forth, he passed a contraband camp, which was at 12th and S Street. There's a school there now, William Lloyd Garrison Elementary Schools on one side. The old Metropolitan Baptist Church is in that same area. Contraband camp was there, where a bunch of African Americans who had run away from slavery in these surrounding territories and amassed themselves right next to a military camp there. 5,000 blacks were living in this little neighborhood right here. One of those was a woman named Mary Dimes. Mary Dimes was a cook. She was a runaway slave who come from Maryland into Washington, D.C., and she had become a cook, and she had made herself a fit and necessary person in President Lincoln's life. She had become his cook. And she was whispering in his ear, putting a little extra something in the coffee every day, telling him that she wanted him to come to this contraband camp so she could see some people who would benefit from the Emancipation Proclamation. And so he comes over there one weekend and for service, and they get to praying and preaching and speaking in tongue and laying on hands. And the president gets religion. Now, I don't know if Mary Dimes was the one that convinced the president to put paragraph 6 into that document. But I do know this, 200,000 African Americans end up in the Union Army. Many of them, 23 of them win the Congressional Medal of Honor. When the war is over, when Congress is debating the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, they say these men earned their freedom on the battlefield. They put on these soldiers' uniform. They dressed in this period dress. They look like Marquette Milton that you see standing here. Frederick Douglass said they had bullets in their pockets and rifles on their shoulders. They marched on forts that were fortified that probably could not be taken. They were massacred in battles in places like Fort Pillow. And these men say when they are debating these amendments in the floor of Congress that these men earned their right to freedom on the battlefield. They earned their citizenship on the battlefield. They earned the right to vote on the battlefield in the 15th Amendment. You know, women don't get the right to vote till much later. women can't join the military, so they don't have that pretext for women. And of course, there's some other reasons why they don't give women the right to vote, but that's one important feature of it. So we have a dynamic now where we have now African Americans have earned their freedom, and America decides, well, they can be free and equal, free under the 13th Amendment, equal under the 14th Amendment, voting under the 15th Amendment, but they're going to be free and equal in a separate but equal society. Well, that's what the court said in 1896 in Plessy versus Ferguson. They said that the framers of the 14th Amendment intended to provide absolute political equality. You can have absolute political equality in a separate but equal society. Now, that's the society I was born into. I was born in 1942 in Noonan, Georgia. It was separate, but it was not equal. That's right, it was separate, but it wasn't equal. You all sit in various positions in a bank right now where African Americans were denied those positions because of the color of their skin. I walked to a schoolhouse in Noonan, Georgia. White kids passed me on a school bus. They were on a bus that was being provided by the county. I walked because the county provided no buses for African Americans. My church provided a school. The county provided us one teacher who taught all 7 grades. And so it was separate, but it wasn't equal. You all know that they drink white water, we drink colored water. Well, the water wasn't colored, but. The water wasn't colored. It was all the same color. It came from the same well. It was all the same, but you get my point. And so by the time we entered college in 1959, my generation decided we'd had enough of that. And let me just say to the audience, because I've got only a few minutes left, that in the first civil rights demonstration I went on at Morehouse College, I went into with a group of students from the Atlanta University Center to the Southern Bell Telephone Company to apply for a job climbing telephone poles. Now, when I told my 15-year-old granddaughter, who I'm going to see later today, I told this story. She was 11 at the time. She said, "Granddaddy, if all you could do when you finished college was climb telephone poles, you could have stayed at home. Your parents were wasting their money." Now, she figured that out, right, at 11. We had to wait till we got to college before we figured that out. But we figured that out right away, and we started sitting in and demonstrating and going to jail. And I was back down there last week in Atlanta. Morehouse gave me a little award for my days in the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement. That was before I went to Mississippi, where I became one of the full-time organizers for SNCC, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so by the time we come to Washington in 1963 for the March on Washington, and I was one of those young people that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, who were fresh from a Mississippi jail, who came here because, and so for the first time I saw what was a huge number of people here at the March on Washington. I think for the first time I realized, people have often asked me, when did I think that the civil rights movement was going to have some kind of important change here in the United States? For me, it was the March on Washington. I think for the first time I saw all of the sea of people, mostly white too, by the way. You know, when you're in Mississippi, in a segregated Mississippi society, you can start to think nobody really cares about you, that all white people are like these people who are chasing you down and locking you up and things like that. And so for the first time I saw what was a large number of people who really cared about the jobs and about freedom and about democracy and about all those things. And so the March on Washington became very important as a seminal act of change, which I think showed America that there was a lot of people out there who really cared about this country, really living up to its creed and things. And so the March on Washington was very important. And also, by the way, there was a civil rights bill pending before the Congress at that time. As a matter of fact, President Kennedy called Dr. King and the organizers of the March on Washington, tried to get them to cancel it. They said, all this mess you're going to stir up while you're in Washington, D.C., you're going to make the Southerners tougher and harder to get along with. They chaired all the major committees in the Congress and the Senate, like they do now in some of these committees. But Dr. King said, no, this March on Washington is going to help you pass that bill, because you're going to see that there's a huge amount of support for it here in the country. So what you saw during the Civil Rights Movement was a series of marches following which Congress passes a Voting Rights Act in 1965. They passed a Fair Employment Practices Act. Why do they need a Fair Employment Practices Act? Because the government itself and also the private industry are practicing racial discrimination in hiring. I told you about the Southern Bell Telephone Company job. situation. And so these marches and demonstrations produce these great and large results. And let me just summarize some of what I think those results are. By the time in 1950, there were only 75,000 African Americans enrolled in college in the United States. By the time we come to the year 2008, which is a magic year in our lives and the life of this country, by the time we come to the year 2008, there's 2.5 million African Americans enrolled in college in the United States of America. Now, if I don't give you any other figure, that tells you right there that the African American community now has used this whole demonstration and marching thing to create whole new opportunities, and we're doing it at a fundamental level with our young people. In 1950, the total aggregate earning for the whole African American community in the United States is $8 billion, billion with a B. By the time we get to 2008, black people earn $918 billion, greater than the GNP of Canada, Turkey, every country in Africa except for Nigeria and South Africa. In 1950, black people, there's 700,000 African Americans registered to vote in the United States. By the time we get to the year 2008, there's 19 million black people registered to vote. And I'm telling you, looking at that figure, that's when Barack Obama said, I think I can win. He said, I think I can win. And when he started out, a lot of people said he couldn't win because he didn't have the numbers. Why? Because if you have 19 million, that's a good number to start with, but you need 60 million votes to get elected president of the United States. So how does he get the rest of those votes? He has to reach across the aisle, as we've always done, find well-meaning whites in the white community and Hispanics and others, and then get those people out to vote. And he was able to do that not only in 2008, but he did it again in 2016. And that coalition was built up to get him elected president, in my view, will elect the first woman president of the United States in 2016, especially if we can get Hillary Clinton to run. I certainly will be with her, and I expect that now, let me just say finally that I was on a panel a few weeks ago, and another PhD historian, okay, I'm stopping now, said that he thought that America had that was on its way back. This was before the president's election, that we were going back to the post-Reconstruction period when Jim Crow and all those laws were passed. And I told him I thought America was not heading in that direction because something had happened that was different. In 1890, when people talk about the post-Reconstruction period, white women didn't have the right to vote. White women got the right to vote at 20 and with the 19th Amendment in 1919, and they now represent a very, very significant progressive force here in America that is never going to turn around. They have their own issues, they have their own concerns, they have their own organizations, they have enough money now, and that coalition that elected President Obama, I think, will rule this country for the foreseeable future. It's come a long way to get here. The African American community represents 20 million of those voters that I talked about. They are fit and they are necessary for the Democratic Party to continue to win. 20 million is not 60 million, but if you take that 20 million away from the Democratic Party, it ain't got a chance. It ain't got a chance against the Republicans. So we're fit and we're necessary and we're ready to go to work to make this country a better place. Thank you.